This past summer, I was at a workshop in Washington, D.C. called Breath of Life. Breath of Life is a workshop that aids communities, mainly communities that have lost their speakers, to connect with their language documentation in major archives around the country. And with the help of a linguistic mentor, the community language activist and the mentor worked together for a week, learning some basics of linguistics, learning to read the documents, and then being able to extract useful information for uses in their communities. This past summer, the Myaamia Center was approached to partner with Recovering Voices at Smithsonian Institute to be one of the key supporters of the 2015 Breath of Life workshop that's held at the National Museum of the American Indian. And so we agreed to, we accepted that role after much discussion with my staff, because I knew it would be some work for our office. But it's a very, very big step for the Myaamia Center to have a role in the Breath of Life programs. And so I invited one of our own tribal members, Dr. Wesley Leonard, who's not only been heavily involved in the Breath of Life program in its form in Berkeley and also in DC, to spend some time talking about what that program is. I think it's important for our colleagues here, our community members, to know what we're doing, why we're involved with these things, and so we wanted to use this opportunity to share that with you. So for our next speaker, we have Dr. Wesley Leonard, weeciilantiiyankwi, so we help each other. So if you'll welcome Dr. Leonard.
It's very good to see you all today. I should apologize in advance. It's hard to speak after a musical performance. There are no musical enhancements to my presentation, but we'll manage. Perhaps we can make up for that, because the topic itself is quite exciting. The Myaamia role in the Breath of Life Archival Institute for Indigenous Languages. So as Daryl just told you, this presentation is primarily about a 2015 workshop, so one that has yet to occur, but one in which the Myaamia Center is going to play a pivotal role. However, my presentation will be giving kind of a longer history that led up to this occurrence. So I'm speaking to you today as a linguist and a professor of Native American Studies who promotes decolonization efforts, particularly through language, as a Myaamia person who's participated in tribal language efforts, and also as a faculty member at the Breath of Life Archival Institute for Indigenous Languages, and also earlier workshops that have also had the name Breath of Life. And so today I want to give you the basic history of Breath of Life and also talk about its design. It's a very special workshop and one that's met with great success, as evidenced by the fact that it's been spreading and people have been doing pretty amazing things there. Next, I'd like to give an overview of the National Breath of Life Institute in Washington, D.C. So this is the one in which the Myaamia Center is going to play a formal role next year. And I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about the Myaamia role in the 2015 Breath of Life Institute, or as we could say, weeciilantiiyankwi. We help each other. So this word here is formed off the basic verb root to help. The last part of it, the suffix at the end, is the person marker. This is first person plural, the we form, we that includes the person you're talking to. And in between the verb root and the suffix is a reciprocal suffix, a reciprocal marker, meaning we help each other. This is very much a Myaamia philosophy of helping each other, of working together, certainly an underlying tenet of the Myaamia Center, of the Miami tribe, or Miami nations, I should say there too, and the relationships with Miami University. This has also been an increasing focus in Breath of Life. So we help each other. Here are some of the places in which this will occur. Planning and implementation, logistics. That is to say, this is where the Myaamia Center will be working with others to put together the program. Sharing the Myaamia example and promoting sleeping language reclamation, mutually beneficial training. But what really is Breath of Life? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to go back to the early 1990s. Pictured here is the California indigenous activist, artist, and language learner L. Frank Manriquez, who very famously said, or I don't know if it's a direct quotation or not, but it's been cited many times, "Hey, what about the languages with no speakers?" What occurred was that in the early 1990s, the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival was founded. It's a group primarily of indigenous activists and a few non-indigenous allies to promote the maintenance and reclamation of California's indigenous languages. California, as some of you know, is a hotbed of linguistic diversity, certainly in contemporary times because of the immigration patterns, with people coming from all over the world to California, but also in terms of its indigenous languages, with upwards of 100 separate languages spoken in the state, and then many dialects within each one of those languages. Partly because of this, and also because of the history of missionization and other factors in California, many of those languages, approximately half, have ceased to be spoken at some point in time. That is to say, they've had some period of time in which they've been sleeping or dormant, in which they've existed in documentation and hence have had reclamation potential, but have not been actively known at a given moment. The Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, alongside many other organizations that were founded or flourishing right around the same time, was already engaged in language maintenance efforts that were for communities that did have speakers. For example, there's a Master Apprentice program which pairs up an apprentice, a language learner, with a master speaker, usually an elderly person, of a given language. And they're mentored and actually paid to spend time together so that the younger person can learn the language directly from the older person. However, those sorts of methodologies, and the other ones include immersion schools and all sorts of things, those are not appropriate, at least initially, for languages that have no speakers at all. Hence, Breath of Life. Breath of Life developed as a response to that need, to the many, many communities that found themselves wanting to reclaim their languages but not having speakers to learn from, hence having to turn somewhere else for language reclamation purposes. This program began in the early 1990s, the University of California, Berkeley, where there are 4 archives with significant material on California languages. And this gets at the heart of Breath of Life. When there's no speaker to learn a given language from, one has to turn somewhere else. With sleeping languages, we turn to language archives. This could be field notes, it could be written dictionaries. In many cases, it's audio documentation from the 20th century. In some cases, it's material that goes quite a bit before that. It can include ethnographic materials, in which sort of language and culture are embedded. And so how this works is that people will visit archives, find materials on their languages, which in the case of the Berkeley archives, there are plentiful ones on California's languages, and then will interpret those using tools of linguistics for purposes of bringing that language out of the pages of documentation and back into the respective communities, which is where it really belongs. These are biennial, 1-week workshops. In the case of the Berkeley Breath of Life, 4 teams from California, language teams whose languages have no speakers. Again, University of California, Berkeley, as a public institution in California, has a special collection of sort of California indigenous materials. Part of this has to do with the reasons for the linguistics department there at Berkeley being founded. It was founded for purposes of documenting California's indigenous languages. Many of those field notes, the subsequent documentation, have now ended up in the Berkeley archives. And so this makes sense, makes a lot of sense for California communities, but of course, the Myaamia people are not a California community, and they're sleeping languages all over both the United States, Canada, and elsewhere. Hence the spread of this model to a larger sphere, to Washington, D.C. So again, with that California Breath of Life model, designed for sleeping languages, And it works by having morning workshops with subsequent homework on topics such as phonetics, grammar, and linguistic terminology, and issues in language revitalization, teaching tools. That is to say, documentation, with a few exceptions, is not created for language learning purposes. There's documentation by linguists for linguists, documentation by missionaries for missionization purposes. All of that material has to be interpreted. People need to know how to read the phonetic alphabet. People need to know how to do grammatical analysis. And so how Breath of Life works is that there are workshops in the mornings to facilitate those sorts of skills, to promote that type of training, and then afternoon visits to actually find documentation, and then very, very busy evenings in which people will work with that documentation. As Daryl mentioned, the norm for Breath of Life is for each language team, that is to say people learning a given Indigenous language, to work with a mentor, somebody, usually a graduate student in linguistics or a professional linguist, who will facilitate the interpretation of that documentation, especially given that much of the documentation is created by linguists for linguists, and hence written in linguistic ease. The workshop ends with presentations of projects developed over the course of the workshop, which can be things like a conversation in a given language, one in which there hasn't been a conversation for 50 years, or various other things. Are really quite impressive and very, very inspirational. But again, this is for California. Myaamia is not a California language, except insofar as some of us used to live in California. Nevertheless, there's been a significant Myaamia role in Breath of Life since 2000. For example, Daryl, in 2000, in 2004, 2008, 2010, 2011, and 12. And I kind of get them mixed up because Breath of Life has spread so much. The Baldwin family has played a very important role in Breath of Life as teachers, as an example of where sleeping language reclamation can go. There's also been participation by many other Myaamiaki, both directly and indirectly. I was too embarrassed to put a picture of myself, but you can see Myaamia folks as well playing various roles. They're in California or in the two newer Breaths of Life in Oklahoma and in Washington, D.C. Beyond this, the Myaamia community's language reclamation efforts have been a prominent example in all of the Breath of Lives that I've ever been to. We've shown, for example, Myaamiaki e Myaamia, The Myaami's Awaken, which is the documentary that the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma commissioned back in 2008 to tell the story, to tell our story from our own point of view of our language efforts. So California workshop for California languages with a significant Myaamia presence. Many folks in California started to dream about having a similar sort of workshop in Washington, D.C., where because of the Smithsonian, there's similarly robust, rich archives with language material for many of the languages of native North America. This began in 2011 with the first National Breath of Life Archival Institute, held at the National Museum of the American Indian, with visits to archives in the DC area, in which Daryl and I were both faculty. More recently, in 2013, we had the second National Breath of Life. And this is similar to California, except one major difference is that it's a 2-week workshop. And of course, the visits are to the DC area archives. You can see some of the archival materials pictured here. The image isn't very clear, but we have audio examples, written field notes, index cards and whatnot. Maybe you can tell a little bit more here. And the Washington, D.C. workshop, like the one in California, culminates in final presentations in which participants do something clever to illustrate what they've been working on for the 2-week period. Pictured here are our Eastern Shawnee relatives who were participating back in 2011. But anyway, so we have the 2-week workshop. The National Breath of Life differs from the Breath of Life in California in that it's not restricted to sleeping language communities. Rather, it's for any community who can benefit from archival language research. So certainly this is especially true for sleeping language communities who have to use archival material, but it's also true for communities that have speakers, insofar as they can come across language material that very often people don't actively know, especially specialized vocabulary. So it has participants from around the United States and Canada. Back in 2013, there was a concentration of people from out west, from British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. It's a strong emphasis on integrating culturally guided linguistic analysis with archival research. This becomes an important point. Linguistics as a science is very good at studying the language as a unit of analysis, at studying grammar, phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and so on. But when we're actually talking about using a language, we're talking about doing something cultural. It takes cultural knowledge and also grammatical knowledge. I think Breath of Life has become increasingly good at merging those two and recognizing that the different participants bring different types of expertise into that enterprise. Because otherwise we might be able to say things that are grammatical in a given language, but that we wouldn't actually need to say, that wouldn't be communicatively appropriate. And most important for our purposes today, there's a strong Myaamia presence in several workshops back in the 2013 Breath of Life. These workshops, things like how to read phonetic writing, grammar without tears, that was one that I taught, language and politics, access, ethics, and intellectual property, workshops bringing language into the community. So the Myaamia example kept showing up again and again and again, as one of the main examples of successful sleeping language reclamation. Should take a moment here to also acknowledge our other sponsors. This program has been funded largely by the Documenting Endangered Languages program of the National Science Foundation. And this is a really big deal insofar as there's always been money for research with languages that have never gone out of use. But now it's starting to be recognized that there's tremendous scientific and cultural value in working with languages that in some cases have gone out of use. Part of that recognition comes from the successful efforts of the Myaamia people. And so we got a generous grant from the Documenting Endangered Languages program of the National Science Foundation, with additional support from the American Folklife Center, the Library of Congress, Consortium for World Cultures, Endangered Language Fund, National Museum of the American Indian, National Museum of Natural History, Native Voices Endowment, and Recovering Voices. Recovering Voices is a current initiative of the Smithsonian Institution. So we see now, so we have the California workshop. It's spread into Oklahoma, which I just glossed over, and into Washington, D.C. The Myaamia people have played a significant role, at least since 2000. And this brings us then to the theme for today, weeciilantiiyankwi, we help each other. So why should the Myaamia Center be a sponsor for the 2015 Breath of Life Archival Institute? Well, there are a number of reasons. One is that there's a Myaamia philosophy, one that's actually common to a number of cultures, just that with knowledge comes responsibility. This is something we heard about this morning. Related is the idea that while learning is not a unidirectional phenomenon, but one that actually occurs in many directions at the same time, a person with a specific type of expertise or wisdom has the responsibility of sharing that with others. This is getting at the importance of, say, for example, learning from elders. The Myaamia language and cultural reclamation efforts have been so strong and so well supported and so well organized, with significant wisdom coming from a number of successes and a few failures over the years, that I argue that the Myaamia Center is now in the place where it has the responsibility to play a lead role in the next National Breath of Life. This is, to be sure, my opinion, but it's also one that's clearly shared by others, as evidenced by the successful grant application to fund the 2015 Breath of Life Institute, with the Myaamia Center specifically identified in this role. Just last week, I spoke at a conference at Tulane University, Conference on Sleeping and Awakening Languages of the Gulf South. And one of the other speakers was remarking to me that she would always want to support the Myaamia Center playing this sort of role because the Myaamia Center has been so good about doing things and is so together. But getting a little bit more specific, Myaamiaki, that is to say the Miamis, can provide and obtain training in linguistics, language pedagogy, archival work, and documentation. These are some of the ways in which we can all help each other. The Myaamia Center staff and many other stakeholders have quite a bit of experience in these areas, but can also gain training by virtue of leading these workshops. For example, getting to the theme of helping each other, comparison of languages and language situations, as occurs in workshops such as Breath of Life, facilitates a better understanding for everybody. Consider, for example, some specific mutual benefits that occurred among people with heritage to Algonquian languages, of which Myaamia is one, in the 2011 Breath of Life Institute. I'm using this example because it comes from another research project that I engaged in which I specifically interviewed people about these ideas. One person had this to say: "It was particularly helpful to have other Algonquian speakers and Algonquianists around. That is to say, people are working with in some cases, related languages, certainly with related social situations, and can support each other accordingly. Having other linguists with a background in Algonquian was helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that you can't tell certain stories except during winter. I spent a great amount of time with other Algonquians. I spent all the time outside of our meetings at the museum with each other, with other Algonquian speakers. We ate dinner together, we all did homework together, and we talked about language. We exchanged words, and sometimes they were the same or at least close, and other times they were very different. But it made me think of how related we all are, and that in some point in history we may have all shared the same language. If we were ever to share curriculum or grammar works, getting at the theme, it would be easily adaptable to each other's language." As an instructor, it was very encouraging for me to see so many Algonquian-speaking groups participating in the first National Breath of Life. Just as our languages are interconnected, so too is our success in keeping them alive for a future generation. And that was from Daryl. But going beyond specific language work, the Myaamia Center serves as a model of successful language and cultural reclamation in an academic context, and thus can inform and be informed by examples and perspectives from other communities. For example, lessons on successful collaboration, Nepoandingue philosophy. Successful collaboration. It's been a theme of the Myaamia Center and its earlier instantiation as the Myaamia Project that the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma and various entities here at Miami University would work together in mutually beneficial ways. Sometimes with very sort of specific things laid out ahead of time, where the tribe would retain ownership of copyright of materials that are produced, but where the tribe then would also help the university in its teaching mission with professors from various departments engaging with the Myaamia Center to develop projects collaboratively that could help the Miami people, but also serve their respective disciplines and the courses that they teach. In all of this has been the Nepoandingue philosophy. We learn from each other. That's what this literally means, more so in English here at Miami University. It's translated as partners in learning and represented here with the image that you see. The eagle feather represents Myaamia people. The red tail hawk feather represents the university. The red string, which appears black on the screen here on the right, is symbolic of the trust and the respect that is the foundation of this relationship. Well, Nepoandingue, partners in learning, we could also change that to weeciilantiiyankwi, we help each other, getting at the same theme. Collaboration becomes very, very important in Breath of Life because it hasn't always been clear who is supposed to do what. Sometimes this has been contested. And I think this comes out of the fact that there are diverse needs and expertise among Breath of Life participants. We might ask, well, of the different people who participate, what kind of needs do they have? What sorts of expertise do they have? Consider, for example, professional linguists who are very, very good at studying grammar, who may or may not be good at other things. Professional archivists who on the one hand have to maintain things so they can be used by future generations, have a whole lot of ethical issues surrounding them, but then also want materials to be used. Of heritage language community members, the members of tribes learning their languages. Of course, there are people whose backgrounds span multiple categories. I'm one such example. So I'm a linguist and also a Native community member. All of these parties, or all of the individuals within these parties, have different needs, have different expertise, and yet have to work together, for Breath of Life to really come across well. The fact of the matter is, however, that sometimes roles among different Breath of Life participants have been contested. Here are a few quotations. These again come out of 2011 that illustrate this theme. I struggled to feel relevant. I think it'd be nice to have the linguist and the participant write up their goals and abilities beforehand. And this is something that the Myaamia Center is very good at doing. I had a great relationship with my linguists, but heard some people had difficulty with theirs. I think maybe more info on the roles of participant and linguist might help. In my case, the teamwork worked very well. When somebody specifies, in my case, there's an implication that there's an understanding that in some other case that was not true. So what this is saying is that, well, we collaborated well, but maybe somebody else didn't. From talking with some participants, it sounded like they felt like they were being bossed or analyzed by the linguist or put to work for the linguist when it ought to have been the other way around. Each situation is unique and depends on the linguist and participant's personality, assumptions, and attitude toward each other. I think that what helped us work well together can be summed up in two things. First, I as a linguist was able to establish early on that I was here to facilitate my mentee's instruction in the language. I think that that important point is easy to miss amid all the other hubbub and interaction that goes on. Second, my mentee and I established very early on what she wanted to do and what she wanted to work on. That made our efforts much more productive. Again, the Myaamia Center is now known in the academic world for doing these things well, to doing these things effectively by approaching collaboration as a model from the outset, recognizing different needs, different types of expertise, and talking about those goals right from the outset so that everybody can work together in mutually beneficial ways. I think that that philosophy and that wisdom is really going to help Breath of Life flourish. And so then in conclusion, we help each other. Again, this is a Myaamia philosophy. It's an increasing focus in Breath of Life. And it's very much in line with Neponvinge, the philosophy that characterizes the Myaamia Center and its many collaborators. And Daryl, how are we doing on time? Because I started a little bit, or quite a bit early.
Yeah, we're about 25 minutes.
We're about 25 minutes early. Okay, well, I have a 3-minute video that was made right after the 2011 Breath of Life Institute to promote it for the Smithsonian. I'd like to go ahead and show that. Of course, this is a little bit out of date, but it gets at the idea and it puts actual voices to some of the things that I just said.
Breath of Life is training workshops through which members of Native American tribes can learn how to work with archival materials and specifically learn how to extract information from these documents that can serve their needs for revitalization of their languages and cultures.
I kept asking Leanne as a linguist, well, what can we do for people who are in my situation with no speakers?
Initially, the attempt for Breath of Life was to bring communities and community members who had lost their speakers near an archive and to use the skills of linguistics, so oftentimes a mentor was selected, to help these community members connect with the archives and then learn how to read them.
Each language group will have either a graduate student or a faculty member who knows linguistics to to work with the group. So in the mornings, we teach people fundamentals of linguistics, particularly how do you read all of this documentation that you're seeing, and how do you figure out the grammar of it, and so on. And so we have lectures and workshops on that.
So it's a process of connecting people with their heritage archives and through the skills of linguistics, creating a learning tool.
So Breath of Life has been going on for about 20 years in California with Native Californians. And Leanne and other members of the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, who have been putting it on, have talked for quite some time about making a national event.
I've seen Breath of Life work for us Californians. I've seen it, I've seen the people with speakers want to come to Breath of Life. You know, and I've seen them come in and have it be valuable for them.
It has a tremendous amount of power to it, because I think as communities begin to engage in that learning process and realize the possibilities and the potential for what they might be able to do, that it's incredibly encouraging. And that's what I really like about Breath of Life.
Because it's still in the planning stages, we don't know exactly what the 2015 video will look like, except we can assume that our own Andrew Streck will have a role in putting it together and doing some of the filming. But you saw this list of sponsors at the end, and certainly, next time, the Myaamia Center is going to be one of them. I really look forward to that. I think it's going to be great. So I appreciate your attention this afternoon. Weeciilantiiyankwi.